December 18th, 1944. Hour 12. The cold had stopped being cold 3 hours ago. Now it was simply absence. Absence of warmth, absence of feeling, absence of everything except the singular awareness that Evelyn Claire Hartwell was still breathing, and that breathing might give her away. 280 meters ahead, through the gray curtain of morning mist hanging over the Hürtgen forest, a German sergeant stood at the edge of a reinforced position. He wore the Feldgrau uniform of the Wehrmacht, a scarf wrapped high against the December wind. Steam rose from the tin cup in his hands. Coffee, probably. Real coffee, not the burnt grain substitute most German soldiers were drinking by this point in the war. Evelyn's crosshairs settled on the space between his second and third uniform button. She had been lying in this exact position for 12 hours. 12 hours among the dead, invisible, not because she was hidden, but because she was impossible. The human mind, she had learned during her psychology studies at the University of Massachusetts, categorizes the world ruthlessly. Threat, non-threat, relevant, irrelevant, and the dead were always irrelevant. 4 bodies surrounded her position. 2 American soldiers from Company F's morning patrol, 2 German infantrymen who had killed them. All 4 had been lying in this shallow depression in the valley floor since yesterday's brief, vicious engagement. The Americans had been trying to probe German lines. The Germans had been doing the same. Both sides had paid the price. Now Evelyn lay among them, dressed in winter camouflage she had treated with snow mud and pine sap to eliminate the artificial brightness of military-issue white. Over that, the torn outer garment of one of the dead German soldiers, because if anyone got close enough to see detail, the silhouette needed to read wrong. Needed to read confusing. Her M1903 Springfield rifle was wrapped in strips of fabric cut from an abandoned tent, breaking up the clean lines that the human eye naturally tracked. 30 rounds in her ammunition pouch. No more. Weight was the enemy of stillness, and stillness was everything. The sergeant took another sip of his coffee. His breath made small clouds in the frozen air. -8 degrees Celsius when she had crawled into position at 0400 hours. The kind of cold that turned moisture into needles, that made metal burn against bare skin, that could kill you just as efficiently as a bullet if you gave it enough time. Evelyn's breathing was shallow, irregular, matching the random movement of fabric in the wind. Her eyes barely open, tracked without focusing. No concentrated gaze, no hard stare. The Germans across the valley had spent 3 months in these positions. They were veterans of the Eastern Front, survivors of Stalingrad and Kursk. They knew what to look for. A fixed stare could be felt even at this distance. Some primitive part of the human brain could sense when it was being hunted. So Evelyn didn't hunt. She simply observed, watched, waited. The sergeant lowered his cup and turned, gesturing to someone deeper in the German position. A radio operator partially visible behind the reinforced logs. The antenna gave him away, that, and the way he kept one hand pressed to his headset. Communication between positions, coordination, that made him valuable, that made him a target for later. But not now. Now was the German sergeant with his coffee and his comfortable routine and his absolute certainty that nothing in the valley below could harm him. Because everyone knew snipers operated from elevated positions, from cover, from places where they could shoot and move, staying ahead of counterfire and artillery. Everyone knew that no one, absolutely no one, would be insane enough to lie exposed in an open valley for hours at a time in sub-freezing temperatures surrounded by corpses. Everyone knew that, which made it perfect. Evelyn released half a breath. The rifle's scope showed her the sergeant in crystal clarity. 280 meters, slight crosswind from the northeast, maybe 3 to 5 miles per hour. She had been watching snow blow across the valley floor for hours, cataloging the wind's patterns. At this range, negligible, but she compensated anyway. Moved the crosshairs 2 inches left of center mass. The sergeant raised his cup again. Evelyn squeezed the trigger. The rifle's report cracked across the valley like a breaking branch. Not loud, the M1903 had a relatively small caliber, but distinct, sharp, final. The sergeant dropped the cup. It hit the frozen ground and bounced once, twice, coffee spreading across the snow in a dark stain that steamed in the cold air. The sergeant himself fell backward, disappearing into his position, dead before his body settled. For exactly 3 seconds, nothing happened. Then the German line erupted. Machine gun fire tore through the morning mist tracers, making bright streaks across the gray sky. The firing was concentrated, disciplined, but pointed entirely wrong. They were shooting at the American ridgeline 800 meters behind Evelyn's actual position. Shooting at where conventional wisdom said the sniper must be. Rifle fire joined the machine guns, then mortars, the heavy crump of shells leaving their tubes, the whistle as they arced overhead toward the American positions. Evelyn could hear the impacts through the frozen ground, feel the percussion waves travel through the earth beneath her. Through her scope, Evelyn watched German soldiers scrambling. Officers shouting orders, men taking cover, scanning the American ridge with field glasses and rifle scopes. One young soldier, barely 18 by the look of him, fired an entire magazine at shadows, his rifle barrel jumping with each shot. No one looked down. Not one single German soldier thought to scan the valley floor where their own dead lay scattered among the American casualties. Evelyn understood in that moment with absolute clarity that she had been right. The psychology professor at UMass who had droned on about selective attention, about how the human brain filters reality through expectations, he had been right. The mind sees what it expects to see. Everything else becomes background noise. She was background noise. She was invisible not because she couldn't be seen, but because seeing her required believing something impossible. The German fire slackened after 4 minutes. Officers were regaining control, stopping their men from wasting ammunition. Evelyn could see a Hauptmann, a captain, moving between positions, gesturing, pointing at specific sectors of the American ridge. Organizing a response. Coordinating fields of fire. Good. Let them coordinate. Let them build a perfect defensive response to an attack that wasn't coming from where they thought it was. Evelyn waited. Stillness required patience, and patience was something she had learned young. 47 minutes passed. The cold crept deeper. Evelyn's extremities had gone numb within the first 6 hours of lying in position. Now the numbness was spreading, creeping up her arms and legs toward her core. She monitored it clinically the way she had been trained. Core temperature was what mattered. Keep the core warm and you could survive. Let the core temperature drop and you died, simple as that. Her core was stable, for now. Through the scope, a new figure emerged from a different German position. Forward observer, distinguished by the way he moved with purpose, while others hunkered down. He carried field glasses and moved to a spot that gave him clear sightlines toward the American positions. Set up. Raised the glasses, began scanning. 290 meters, longer shot than the sergeant. The observer was partially concealed by brush, making the target smaller, more difficult. But he was stationary, focused on his task, and Evelyn had all the time in the world. She adjusted her aim, calculated the range, the wind, the slight downward angle from her depression in the valley floor. The observer's head and shoulders were visible above the brush. Center mass would be obscured, but a headshot at this range was possible. Difficult, but possible. Evelyn waited for her heartbeat to settle, felt the rhythm, synchronized her breathing to it. Between heartbeats, the body was most still. Between breaths, most stable. She fired. The observer's head snapped back. The field glasses fell from his hands, landing in the snow below his position. his body folded, sliding down into cover. The German reaction was immediate but confused. More firing, but this time it was scattered. Some soldiers fired at the American ridge. Others fired at different angles, trying to account for the fact that this shot had come from a different direction than the first. Evelyn could see the confusion spreading. Officers arguing, pointing in different directions. One Hauptmann was gesturing wildly, his face red even from this distance. The tactical problem was obvious. The shots were coming from different angles, which meant multiple snipers, which meant a coordinated American operation. But where were they? How many? How had they gotten into position without being detected? The Germans had no answers, because the answer that a single American operative was lying in the open valley among their casualties was too absurd to consider. This had been the gamble. Captain Nathaniel Holloway had called it suicidal when Evelyn first proposed it. They had been in his command tent 2 evenings ago, the canvas walls snapping in the winter wind, a single kerosene lamp providing inadequate light and less warmth. "You want to do what?" Holloway had asked, his Iowa accent making the question sound even more incredulous. "I want to position myself in the no man's land, between our lines and theirs," Evelyn had said, keeping her voice steady, professional. "Among the casualties from yesterday's patrol action. I'll remain in position for as long as necessary to identify German observation posts, command elements, and key defensive positions." Holloway had stared at her for a long moment. He was 35 years old, with the weathered face of a farmer and the careful eyes of a man who had watched too many soldiers die. "Miss Hartwell, it's Evelyn, or Private Hartwell if you need to maintain protocol." "Private Hartwell," Holloway corrected, though something in his tone suggested he thought the Office of Strategic Services' decision to give her a military rank was questionable at best. "You understand that what you're proposing is suicide. I understand it's unconventional. It's beyond unconventional. It's insane." Holloway pulled out a worn map, spreading it across his field desk. "Look here. The valley between our positions and the German ridge. 200 to 300 meters of open ground. Our casualties from yesterday's patrol are scattered through there. The Germans have clear sight lines from multiple positions. They have machine guns zeroed on every approach. You're talking about crawling out there in darkness, positioning yourself among dead men and staying there, staying absolutely still for hours. Maybe days." "Exactly. In sub-zero temperatures. Yes. Where you can't move to generate warmth, can't eat because the scent might alert German patrols, can't drink because even small movements could give you away. Captain Holloway, I understand the risks. Do you—" Holloway's voice had gone quiet. "Do you understand that if they spot you, you're dead? There's no extraction, no support fire, no way for us to help you if things go wrong. You'll be alone out there." Evelyn had met his eyes. "I've been studying the German observation patterns for 2 weeks. They're disciplined. They're careful. But they're also predictable. They scan the ridge lines, they watch the obvious approaches, they focus their attention where training tells them threats will emerge. What they don't do, what they've been trained not to do, is waste attention on things that don't matter, like casualties. You're betting your life on German psychology. I'm betting my life on human psychology. The brain categorizes threat versus non-threat, movement versus stillness, the living versus the dead. Once something is categorized as dead, as irrelevant, the mind stops seeing it. Not because the eyes aren't capable, but because the brain has learned to filter, to ignore." Holloway had studied her face. "You really believe this?" "I know this. It's not belief, Captain. It's cognitive science. The OSS sent you because of your psychology background. They sent me because conventional tactics are failing in this sector. American casualties are mounting. The Germans have this ridge locked down and we can't advance without taking catastrophic losses. I'm offering you a solution. A solution that might get you killed. A solution that might save dozens of American lives. Evelyn had paused, then added quietly, "Isn't that why we're all here?" Holloway had looked at the map again, looked at the positions marked there, the German strongpoints that had resisted 3 weeks of American assaults. Finally, he had nodded once. "If and this is a significant, if I approve this, you withdraw at the first sign your position is compromised. Clear, clear. And you report back every piece of intelligence you gather. Positions, troop movements, defensive preparations, all of it. That's the mission, Captain. The mission is to survive Private Hartwell. The intelligence is secondary." But they both knew that was a lie. The intelligence was everything. Without it, the next American assault would be as bloody and futile as the last 3. With it, they might actually break through. So here she was, 12 hours into the mission, 2 confirmed kills and the German defenses beginning to fracture. Through her scope, Evelyn continued her systematic observation. The panic from her second shot was subsiding now, German discipline reasserting itself. Officers were organizing their men, establishing new observation protocols, but the psychological damage was done. She could see it in how the soldiers moved, quicker, more nervous, checking behind them, scanning angles they hadn't worried about before. Fear was a weapon, and she was learning to use it. By 13:30 hours, Evelyn had cataloged 17 distinct German positions. 3 machine gun emplacements positioned to create overlapping fields of fire. 2 mortar teams, their positions revealed by the careful way ammunition was moved to them. A command post identifiable by the frequency of messenger traffic. Multiple rifle positions, some expertly camouflaged but visible from her lateral perspective in the valley. And 1 position that troubled her, a German soldier who moved differently from the others. Younger than she expected for his apparent rank, maybe mid-30s. More careful than the rest. He didn't react to the shots the way the others had, didn't fire blindly at the American ridge. Instead, he had pulled back into cover and simply watched, observed, studied. Through her scope, Evelyn saw him emerge briefly. Saw the way he scanned not the American positions but the angles, calculating, working the problem. Klaus Weber. She didn't know his name yet, but she recognized the type. Sniper. Professional. Experienced. The kind of soldier who would eventually realize that the shooting angles didn't match the supposed American positions. Who would start asking questions no one else was asking. He would be a problem. Later. For now, Evelyn had other targets. A German radio operator emerged from a communication trench, moving between positions. He was trying to be quick, trying to minimize exposure, but he had to cross open ground, had to be visible even if only for seconds. Evelyn tracked him, led him by 2 body lengths, squeezed. The operator went down at 260 meters. The radio on his back sparked as it hit the ground circuits, shorting out. Another piece of the German command and control network severed. More firing, more confusion. The Germans were beginning to understand they were facing something unusual. But understanding didn't help them. They still couldn't locate her, still couldn't stop her. Evelyn fired 6 more times throughout the afternoon. A machine gun team leader who exposed himself while directing fire. An ammunition runner carrying grenades to a forward position. A sergeant attempting to restore order among soldiers who were growing increasingly reluctant to expose themselves. Each shot calculated not just for immediate tactical effect, but for psychological impact. Each shot eroding German morale bit by bit. By 1800 hours, the December sun was setting behind the German positions, throwing long shadows across the valley. Evelyn had been motionless in sub-zero temperatures for 14 hours. Her water had frozen solid hours ago. Her rations were untouched. Eating was impossible without movement, and movement was death. 9 shots fired, 9 confirmed hits. The German defensive position was visibly degraded. Soldiers were refusing to move between positions even when ordered. The careful coordination that had made these defenses so effective was breaking down. And then the real test began. The temperature dropped as darkness fell, -12 degrees Celsius, the kind of cold that killed. Evelyn felt it settling into her bones, into the spaces between her ribs, into the hollows behind her eyes. This was the moment Holloway had warned her about, the moment when human physiology would start screaming at her to move, to generate warmth, to do anything except lie still. She controlled her breathing, made it shallow, slow, conserved energy. Her core temperature was what mattered. Everything else was secondary. At 2200 hours, she heard them. Footsteps, crunching through frozen snow, German voices low and tense. A patrol, 2 men moving through the valley checking the dead. Evelyn closed her eyes completely, slowed her breathing until it was barely perceptible. Her hands wrapped around her rifle were numb. Her legs had stopped sending signals to her brain hours ago. But her mind was sharp-focused, counting the footsteps. 10 meters away, 8, 6. The voices were clearer now. Young men speaking in the careful tones of soldiers who knew they were exposed. One of them was nervous, his words coming quick and clipped. The other was trying to sound calm, trying to be the steady one. 4 meters. They were checking bodies, she could hear it. The rustle of uniforms being moved, searched for intelligence or valuables. The Germans were thorough. They would check every casualty, which meant they would check her. 2 meters. Evelyn felt a boot touch her leg. Then pressure. Weight. One of the German soldiers was stepping over her, using her body as a stable point in the snow-covered terrain. Every instinct in her body screamed move. Every survival reflex demanded she react, fight, run. The pressure on her leg was real, physical, undeniable. A human being was standing on her. In 3 seconds he would look down, would see her eyes, would see the rifle, would see everything. Evelyn controlled the scream, controlled the flinch, controlled every muscle, every nerve, every automatic response that evolution had programmed into human beings over millions of years. She became perfectly, absolutely still. Not the stillness of a sniper waiting for a shot. The stillness of a corpse. The complete absence of life, of tension, of anything that would register to another human being as threatening or alive. The German soldier's weight shifted. His boot pressed harder for a moment, using her leg for leverage as he stepped forward. She felt him move past, heard his footsteps continue, heard him call to his partner. "Nichts here." Nothing here. The patrol moved on, the footsteps faded. After 5 minutes, Evelyn allowed herself to breathe normally again. Her hands were shaking. Not from cold, though the cold was definitely a factor. From the adrenaline crash, from the absolute terror of being discovered, from the knowledge that she had just passed a test that should have been impossible to pass. A human being had stepped on her, had used her as a piece of terrain, and had not recognized her as alive. She was truly invisible. But the night was not over. Would not be over for 7 more hours. 7 hours of -12 degrees, 7 hours of absolute immobility, 7 hours of cold seeping deeper into her core, stealing warmth, stealing life. Evelyn thought about her father. Professor Marcus Hartwell, standing in his study at their Massachusetts home, surrounded by books on classical literature and ancient philosophy. His voice had been cold when she told him she was joining the OSS. "You're throwing away your potential," he had said. "Throwing away years of education to play soldier." "I'm using my education, Father. Psychological warfare is a waste of a brilliant mind. You should be pursuing your doctorate, publishing, contributing to the field. Instead, you're running off to war like some common recruit. The war matters. Your future matters. Your intellectual development matters. What will you be when this is over? What will you have accomplished besides following orders? Evelyn had looked at him, at this man who had shaped her entire childhood with expectations and demands and constant grinding pressure to achieve, to excel, to be worthy of the Hartwell name. "I'll be someone who made a difference," she had said quietly. "I'll be someone who used what I learned to see lives. Isn't that worth something? It's worth nothing if you die in the process." Now, lying in the frozen darkness with German patrols overhead and the cold stealing her warmth degree by degree, Evelyn wondered if he had been right, if this was worth it, if proving something to herself, proving she was more than just Professor Hartwell's brilliant daughter, was worth freezing to death in a forest in Germany. Then she thought about the 9 German soldiers she had killed today. 9 pieces removed from the defensive network. 9 sources of fire that wouldn't kill American soldiers in tomorrow's assault. 9 reasons that Company F might actually survive their next advance. It was worth it. She just had to survive the night. Dawn came at 07:15 hours, the sun rising behind the American positions, throwing the German ridge into silhouette. Evelyn had been in position for 27 hours. Her core temperature had dropped to dangerous levels. She could feel it in how her thoughts were starting to slow, starting to drift. Hypothermia was setting in, but she was still functional, still observant, still deadly. The Germans were different this morning, more cautious. The casual routines she had observed yesterday were gone. Soldiers moved between positions quickly, keeping low, minimizing exposure. Officers stayed in cover. The entire defensive line was on edge, waiting for the invisible sniper to strike again, which made them predictable. Fear made people rush, made them take shortcuts, made them make mistakes. Evelyn waited for the mistakes. At 09:30 hours, a German lieutenant made his. He was trying to coordinate between 2 positions, and the only way to do it was to move through a small gap in their defensive line. He was quick, Evelyn had to give him that. Quick and smart, timing his movement for when he thought the American sniper would be looking elsewhere. But Evelyn wasn't an American sniper on the ridge. She was down here with perfect sight lines to angles the Germans couldn't even imagine were compromised. 290 meters. The lieutenant was moving feet, almost running. Evelyn led him, fired. He dropped mid-stride, his momentum carrying his body forward into the snow. The German line didn't erupt in fire this time. They were learning. Instead, there was a moment of terrible silence, and then Evelyn saw something that changed everything. A single German soldier emerged from a well-camouflaged position. The younger man she had noticed yesterday. Deliberate in his movements. He didn't fire, didn't take cover. He simply stood there, field glasses to his eyes, scanning. Not scanning the American ridge, scanning the valley. Scanning methodically, section by section, using a grid pattern that spoke of professional training and dangerous competence. Klaus Weber. Through her scope, Evelyn watched him work. Watched him eliminate possibilities, narrow down options, work the problem like the professional he clearly was. He was doing exactly what she would do in his position. Finding the impossible answer because all the possible answers had failed. And he was good, very good. After 10 minutes, he lowered his glasses and pointed. Not at Evelyn's position specifically, but at the general area of the valley where she lay. He was gesturing to other soldiers, explaining something, drawing conclusions. He hadn't found her yet, but he was close, closer than anyone else had come. This was the new problem, the intelligent enemy who refused to accept the obvious explanation, who asked the right questions, who trusted evidence over expectation. Evelyn had a decision to make. She could shoot Weber now, eliminate the threat before he eliminated her. But he was in a difficult position, partially concealed, and the shot would be challenging. Miss and she would definitely reveal herself. Hit and the Germans would know their best analyst was dead, which might make them more cautious, or it might make them angry enough to start searching the valley systematically. Or she could wait, let Weber keep searching, trust that her position was still too impossible for even him to believe. It was a gamble. Everything about this mission was a gamble. Evelyn watched Weber through her scope, watched him scan the valley again, slower this time, more careful. His field glasses swept across her position once, twice. And she held her breath, held her stillness, became nothing more than another casualty in a valley full of casualties. Weber lowered his glasses, shook his head, turned back to his position. He didn't believe it. Even looking right at her, he couldn't make himself believe what his eyes were telling him. The impossible remained impossible, and that impossibility was Evelyn's shield. But now she knew that somewhere in the German positions was a soldier smart enough and skilled enough to figure this out. It was only a matter of time, a race between his deductive reasoning and her mission timeline, which meant she needed to work faster. As the December sun climbed higher, burning off the morning mist, Evelyn began the second day of her war. 280 meters from the German lines, lying among the dead, she hunted the living. And somewhere in those German positions, Klaus Weber hunted her. The real duel had begun. The document arrived at German 7th Army headquarters at 1400 hours on December 19th, marked urgent. Oberst Friedrich Kessler, intelligence officer for the 275th Infantry Division, had drafted it personally after interviewing every surviving officer from the contested sector. The report's language was clinical, precise German military efficiency at its finest. But beneath the formal structure, Kessler's frustration was evident. Kriegstagebuch, 275, Infantry Division classified for command. Eyes-only date, 19 December 1944. Subject unidentified, American Sniper Activity Sector 7 Alpha. Duration 18 December 1300 hours to present 28 hours continuous. Confirmed casualties 11 personnel KIA. Additional 4 WIA. Nature of threat, unprecedented and tactically significant. Analysis. Single shooter operating from unknown position. Shooting angles inconsistent with all identified American defensive lines. Multiple observation posts report no muzzle flash visible during engagement sequences. Counter battery fire has failed to suppress or identify activity. Tactical impact. Radio communications disrupted in 3 sectors. Forward observation capability degraded by 30%. Mortar coordination severely compromised. Command cohesion deteriorating. Morale assessment, significant psychological impact observed among enlisted personnel. Soldiers refusing exposure orders. Officers report difficulty maintaining defensive discipline. Soldiers have designated threat as Die Geistfrau. The Ghost Woman. Superstitious attribution suggests irrational fear response. Recommendation: deploy specialist counter-sniper assets immediately. Request urgent transfer of Oberleutnant Klaus Weber from reserve duties to active hunting operations. This shooter represents clear and present danger to divisional combat effectiveness and unit cohesion. Priority immediate action required. Oberst F. Kessler, intelligence officer, 275th Infantry Division. The report landed on Weber's desk 3 hours later. He read it twice, then walked to the map table in his quarters. At 34 years old, Klaus Weber had survived 4 years of war by trusting evidence over assumption. Stalingrad had taught him that the impossible happened daily. Kursk had taught him that the enemy was never as predictable as training manuals suggested. But this was something new. Weber stuck pins in the map at each reported casualty location, drew lines backward from each position calculating angles of fire. The lines should have converged on the American ridge, should have pointed to obvious sniper hides to positions any competent marksman would use. Instead, the lines scattered, intersected at impossible points, suggested shooting positions that didn't exist. Unless. Weber pulled out his field glasses and stared at his own map, at the valley between the lines, at the small depression where yesterday's patrol engagement had left casualties from both sides. Unmöglich, he whispered. Impossible. But he had learned to trust the impossible. The next morning, Weber assembled his team. 2 spotters, both veterans, a radio operator, all of them sworn to silence about what they were hunting. Die Geist, Frau, the soldiers were calling the American sniper, the ghost woman. Someone had started the rumor that the shooter was female because only a woman could be this invisible, this patient. Weber knew it was superstition, the kind of supernatural explanation that soldiers created when reality became too strange to accept. But the name had spread, Die Geistfrau, and with it fear. Fear was contagious. Weber could see it in how his own men moved now. Quick, nervous checking angles they had never worried about before. The Americans hadn't advanced an inch, hadn't fired a single artillery shell. But they were winning. Winning through psychological pressure, through the steady erosion of confidence. Weber respected that, respected the mind behind it, which meant he would enjoy killing them. Hour 36. Evelyn's core temperature had dropped to 34 degrees Celsius. She knew this not from any instrument, but from the symptoms. The shivering had stopped 2 hours ago, which was bad. Shivering meant the body was still fighting. When shivering stopped, it meant the body was surrendering. Her thoughts were slower now, coming in fragments instead of clear sequences. She had to concentrate to maintain situational awareness, to track the German positions, to stay mission-focused. And she was seeing things. Her father stood 15 meters away at the edge of the tree line. Professor Marcus Hartwell in his usual tweed jacket and wire-rimmed glasses, looking at her with that expression of profound disappointment she knew so well. "This is what you chose," he said, his voice carrying across the frozen valley with perfect clarity. "This is what you valued more than your education, more than your future lying in the mud among corpses." Evelyn knew it was a hallucination, knew that hypothermia caused altered mental states, that her brain was misfiring as it tried to conserve energy and maintain core functions. But knowing didn't make the vision less vivid. "You're not real," she whispered the words, barely audible even to herself. "I'm as real as your choices," her father replied. "You wanted to prove something, wanted to show you were more than Marcus Hartwell's daughter, more than a scholarship student from Massachusetts. You wanted to matter. I do matter. You're dying in a forest in Germany. You've killed 11 men, 11 human beings who had families, who had futures. For what? For intelligence that will save a few American soldiers, for a mission that no one asked you to volunteer for." The moral weight of it pressed down harder than the cold. 11 men dead by her hand now. She had tracked each one clinically, professionally. Sergeant with coffee cup, forward observer, radio operator, lieutenant, machine gun team leader, ammunition runner, another sergeant, 2 more riflemen, communications specialist, the German officer she had shot this morning. 11 men who had been alive 48 hours ago. 11 men whose last thoughts she would never know, whose families would receive telegrams, whose deaths were her responsibility. "War requires killing," Evelyn said, but her voice lacked conviction. "War requires nothing," her father's hallucination replied. "Human beings choose war, choose killing. You chose this. Own it." "I'm saving lives by taking them. Does that make you a hero or a murderer? Can you tell the difference anymore? Evelyn closed her eyes, tried to focus on breathing, on the mission, on anything except the philosophical abyss opening beneath her. When she opened her eyes again, her father was gone, but the question remained. What was she becoming? The pain helped ground her. Her frostbitten fingers felt like they were being stabbed with hot needles every time blood tried to circulate. Her toes had gone beyond pain into a numbness that frightened her more than the pain had. The medics had warned her about this. Frostbite progression, tissue death, potential amputation if she survived. If, through the scope movement. Germans changing positions for the midday rotation. Predictable, just like she had catalogued. They moved in patterns, and patterns could be exploited. A German communications specialist emerged carrying equipment toward a forward position. Young, maybe 20. Moved with the nervous energy of someone who knew he was exposed but had orders to follow. Evelyn tracked him. 295 meters. Clear shot despite partial brush cover. She fired. The specialist fell across his equipment, blood mixing with snow. The radio he'd been carrying sparked and died. Another thread in the German communications network severed. Through her scope, Weber reacted. Saw him drop into cover immediately, saw the field glasses come up, saw him scanning. Not the ridge this time. The valley. He was learning. Good. Let him learn. Let him work the problem. It would make her eventual victory that much more satisfying, or her death that much quicker. Through his field glasses, Klaus Weber studied the valley systematically, grid by grid, eliminating possibilities. He had narrowed the search area to a section approximately 60 meters wide by 40 meters deep. Somewhere in that space, the American sniper was concealed. Had to be. The angles demanded it. But where Weber had already scanned the area 3 times, saw nothing unusual. Dead soldiers from yesterday's engagement, snow-covered ground, scattered equipment, the kind of terrain every battlefield accumulated the detritus of violent death. Nothing that looked like a concealed position, which meant the concealment was perfect, or meant he was wrong about the location entirely. Weber pulled back, consulted his notes, rechecked his calculations. The mathematics were sound. The angles didn't lie. The shooter was in that valley in that specific section. He raised the glasses again, focused on individual elements. That American soldier fallen forward with arms outstretched. That German rifleman lying on his side. That pile of equipment that might be a backpack or might be Weber's hands, tightened on the glasses. That pile was slightly wrong. The shape was close to abandoned equipment, but the proportions were off. The way the snow had accumulated around it suggested something underneath. Something that retained heat, even minimal heat. He studied it for 5 full minutes. Watched for any movement, any sign of respiration, any indication of life. Nothing. But his instincts, honed through 4 years of war, told him he was looking at something important. Weber lowered the glasses and called for his senior spotter. Showed him the location. "What do you see?" Weber asked. The spotter studied the area. "Dead Americans, dead Germans, equipment, nothing unusual, Oberleutnant." "Look at the pile near the center, the one that might be a backpack." The spotter looked longer, finally shook his head. "I see it. Looks like abandoned gear. Measure the distance for me, from our position to that pile." The spotter used his rangefinder. 278 meters, Oberleutnant." 278 meters, within the range of every reported kill, within the calculated firing zone. "If you were American," Weber said carefully, "and you wanted to observe our positions without being detected, where would you position yourself?" "On the ridge, Oberleutnant. Elevated position, good sight lines, easy withdrawal." "And if the ridge was too obvious, too expected?" The spotter thought about it. "Then, nowhere. There is nowhere else with adequate cover and sight lines." "Exactly." Weber smiled without humor. Which means if there is a sniper who isn't on the ridge, they must be nowhere. Must be in a position so obvious, so impossible that we look at it and see nothing. The spotter's eyes widened as understanding dawned. You think the American is in the valley among the dead? I think it's the only explanation that fits the evidence. But Oberleutnant, that would mean someone lying in sub-zero temperatures for days, without movement, without anything we think is possible, yes. Weber raised his glasses again. Which is why it's perfect. We don't look there because we can't imagine anyone doing it. Should we fire on the position? Weber considered. If he was right and the American was there, a few well-placed rounds would end the threat. But if he was wrong, he would waste ammunition and reveal that he was searching the valley. Would make the American more cautious, and there was something else. A nagging doubt. The pile in the valley looked too perfect, too obviously placed. If he were setting a trap, if he wanted to draw German fire, he would create exactly this kind of suspicious anomaly. No, Weber said slowly. Not yet. It could be a decoy. Could be the Americans trying to make us waste ammunition on corpses while the real sniper operates from the ridge. Then what should we do? We watch, we wait, and if it moves, we kill it. Evelyn saw Weber watching her. Through her scope, she could see him clearly. Could see the field glasses trained on her position, could see him studying the valley. Could see the moment when his gaze settled on her exact location. Her heart rate increased. Not much she had too much control for that, but enough. Enough that she had to concentrate on breathing, on maintaining the absolute stillness that was her only protection. Weber studied her for 5 minutes. 5 minutes that felt like 5 hours. Then he lowered his glasses, consulted with another soldier, raised the glasses again. Evelyn waited for the bullet, waited for the inevitable moment when Weber would need to fire to test his theory to eliminate the threat. But the bullet didn't come. Instead, Weber pulled back into cover. He had seen her, had looked directly at her, and hadn't fired, which meant one of two things. Either he didn't believe what he was seeing, couldn't make himself accept that someone would endure what she was enduring. Or he thought she was a decoy, a trap, and firing would reveal his hand. Either way, she had survived, for now. But Weber was the new variable in her equation, the intelligent enemy who asked the right questions. He would keep looking, keep analyzing. And eventually he would find an answer he believed. Evelyn needed to remove him from the equation. The problem was geometry. Weber's position was well concealed, protected by reinforced logs and careful camouflage. She could see him when he exposed himself to observe. But those exposures were brief, unpredictable. A shot at him would be difficult, low percentage. But Weber wasn't working alone. Through her scope, Evelyn identified his spotter. Younger man, less experienced, positioned slightly forward of Weber's hide to give better sight lines. The spotter was more exposed, more careless. He didn't have Weber's instincts, didn't have his caution. 240 meters, clear shot. The spotter was focused on the American ridge, scanning with field glasses, not expecting death from the valley below. Evelyn made the calculation. Killing the spotter wouldn't eliminate Weber, but it would blind him, would force him to operate without his eyes, without the second set of observations that made counter-sniper work effective. And it would send a message. You found me, you looked right at me, and you still failed. Evelyn centered the crosshairs. The spotter was stationary, focused on his task. Perfect target. She fired. The spotter's head snapped sideways. His body fell back into the position out of sight. The field glasses tumbled from his hands, landing in the snow below. Through the scope, Evelyn saw Weber react, saw him drop into cover, saw the moment of shock as he processed what had just happened. His spotter, his protection gone in an instant. And the shot had come from the valley, from exactly where Weber had been looking. Evelyn could almost see the realization crossing Weber's face. The confirmation of his theory, the validation of his impossible conclusion. She wasn't a decoy. She was real. She was there in that valley doing what no one should be able to do. Weber disappeared completely into his hide. Didn't expose himself again. Good. Let him hide. Let him sit there knowing that he had found her but couldn't kill her. Knowing that she was out there invisible and deadly and there was nothing he could do about it. Evelyn allowed herself a small, grim satisfaction. Then she returned to hunting. 12 confirmed kills now. The afternoon was young. The German defensive network was bleeding expertise. Every kill Evelyn made removed not just a body but knowledge. Experience. The kind of institutional memory that kept military units functioning under stress. A mortar observer who had survived Stalingrad, who knew how to call fire with deadly precision, gone. 290 meters. Clean shot through a gap in his cover. A machine gun team leader who had been teaching younger soldiers proper fields of fire eliminated. 310 meters. Partial concealment. Evelyn waited for him to shift position, then took the shot, a supply runner bringing ammunition forward, someone who knew the communication trenches intimately, killed mid-stride, 260 meters, moving target. She led him perfectly. A sergeant with 20 years of service attempting to restore order among men who were losing their nerve, shot while standing in the open trying to lead by example. 270 meters. Each loss reverberated through the German line. Not just the tactical impact of one fewer soldier, but the psychological trauma of watching expertise die, of seeing the soldiers you relied on, the ones who kept you alive, picked off one by an enemy you couldn't see, couldn't fight, couldn't stop. By 1500 hours, Evelyn had fired 20 shots over 36 hours. 20 confirmed kills. The German 275th Infantry Division, veterans of the Eastern Front, was disintegrating. But not quietly. Through her scope, Evelyn saw officers arguing, saw soldiers refusing orders, saw the careful defensive coordination that had held this ridge for 3 months collapse into frightened men trying to survive. At 1700 hours, she observed something significant. German soldiers were preparing for withdrawal. She could see it in the way they were packing equipment, consolidating ammunition, preparing defensive positions to the rear. They were abandoning the ridge, giving up positions they had held for 3 months, because one person with a rifle and an impossible plan had made those positions untenable. Captain Holloway had been right. One person could change a tactical situation. Just not in the way anyone expected. But as Evelyn watched the German withdrawal preparations, she felt her body failing. 42 hours in -12-degree temperatures. 11 pounds of body weight lost to dehydration and metabolic strain. Frostbite advancing up her fingers and toes. Core temperature in the danger zone. She had won, but the victory was killing her. At 1800 hours, the Germans began their withdrawal. It wasn't orderly. Wasn't the disciplined tactical movement that German training demanded. The soldiers were bunching together for security, moving too fast, abandoning proper intervals. They were routed, not by superior force, but by psychological pressure they couldn't resist. Through the fading December light, Evelyn watched them go. Watched the positions she had studied for 2 weeks empty out. Watched the ridge that had cost so many American lives fall without a single assault. She had done it. Accomplished what 3 weeks of conventional attacks couldn't. And then her body gave out. The shaking started suddenly, violently. Not cold shakes, those had stopped hours ago. This was her nervous system failing, muscles firing randomly as core temperature dropped below critical thresholds. Her vision tunneled, peripheral awareness collapsing. Evelyn tried to maintain position, tried to stay focused, but her mind was slipping away. Hypothermia was winning. The cold she had endured for 42 hours was claiming its price. She thought about trying to crawl back to American lines. But her legs wouldn't respond to commands. Her arms were dead weight. Movement was impossible. So she lay there among the dead, becoming one of them. The last thing she saw before consciousness faded was the American Ridge. 800 meters away. Might as well be 800 miles. Captain Nathaniel Holloway stood on the ridge field glasses, pressed to his eyes, watching the German withdrawal with satisfaction mixed with growing concern. The Germans were abandoning their positions. Company F was already moving forward, encountering minimal resistance. The breakthrough Holloway had hoped for was happening. But Evelyn Hartwell hadn't reported back. Radio silence wasn't unusual. She couldn't exactly operate a radio while maintaining her cover. But she should have withdrawn by now. Should have made it back to American lines as the Germans pulled out. Unless she couldn't. Holloway lowered his glasses and made a decision. He grabbed 3 soldiers from Company F. "With me, Valley Floor. We're looking for Private Hartwell." They found her 20 minutes later, lying exactly where she had been for the past 42 hours. At first, they thought she was dead. Her skin was gray, her breathing so shallow it was barely detectable. Her hands were frozen to her rifle fingers, locked in rigor around the stock. The medics had to carefully pry her fingers open one at a time. Had to work slowly to avoid breaking frozen tissue. Got her onto a stretcher, covered her with every blanket they could find, started the careful process of rewarming. That was the only chance against severe hypothermia. Holloway found her notebook in her gear, opened it. Inside were detailed sketches of 17 German positions, complete with firing angles, estimated troop strength, and tactical notes. Intelligence that would make the next phase of the American advance possible. Intelligence purchased with 42 hours of suffering that would have killed most soldiers in half that time. "Will she make it?" Holloway asked the senior medic. "Core temperature is 34 degrees. That's critical hypothermia. Frostbite is severe. Dehydration is life-threatening, but she's young, she's strong, and she's still fighting." The medic looked up. "What the hell was she doing out there, Captain?" "Winning the war," Holloway said quietly. "One impossible mission at a time." They carried Evelyn back to American lines as Company F secured the German ridge. By 2300 hours, American forces occupied positions that had resisted 3 weeks of assaults. Total American casualties during the operation: 4 wounded, none killed. German casualties over 42 hours. 37 confirmed dead, most of them leaders and specialists. The kind of losses that destroyed unit cohesion and couldn't be quickly replaced. All because one woman had understood that the greatest camouflage wasn't hiding from the enemy. It was making the enemy unable to believe what they were seeing. 24 hours later, Evelyn regained consciousness in a field hospital. Her hands were bandaged. Her feet were bandaged. IVs ran into both arms, pumping warm fluids into her core. The pain was extraordinary, a full-body agony as frozen tissue came back to life. Captain Holloway sat beside her cot. "Welcome back," he said. Evelyn tried to speak. Her throat was too damaged from dehydration and cold. She managed a whisper. "Mission status. Complete. Ridge is ours. Your intelligence made it possible. Division Command wants to give you a medal. OSS wants to promote you. I want to know if you've completely lost your mind." Evelyn almost smiled. "Jury's out. The doctors say you'll recover. Frostbite is severe but manageable. No permanent damage if we're lucky. You'll be evacuated to rear area hospitals for treatment." "No." Holloway leaned forward. "Evelyn, you almost died. You pushed your body past any reasonable limit. You need medical care. I need 4 hours of sleep and a hot meal." "That's not funny. It's not a joke." Evelyn's voice was getting stronger. "The gap we created in the German line. It won't stay open long. They'll reinforce. We need to exploit it now. We are exploiting it. Company F is advancing as we speak. They'll face the same problem we had, German positions they can't see, defenses they can't identify, unless someone provides intelligence on what they're facing. Holloway stared at her. You can't be serious. I'm completely serious. The technique works, Captain. It works better than anything else we've tried. One more mission, one more ridge, then I'll accept evacuation. The answer is no, absolutely not. You're in no condition. I'm in the only condition that matters. I know how to do this. I know what works. How many Americans will die if I don't? It was the same argument she had used 3 days ago, the same logic, the same appeal to saving lives. And Holloway, damn him, knew she was right. 4 hours sleep, he said finally. Hot meal, full medical evaluation. If, and this is a significant, if the doctors clear you, we'll discuss it. But I want it on record that I think this is insane. Noted. Evelyn closed her eyes. The pain was fading as the morphine kicked in. Captain? Yes. Weber. The German sniper. He found me. Looked right at me through his field glasses. But he didn't shoot. He didn't believe it, thought I was a decoy, reported me as an American trick. Evelyn's voice was fading as sleep claimed her. The impossible saved my life. Then let's hope the impossible keeps working, Holloway said, because you're about to ask it to perform one more miracle. He sat there watching her sleep, this 22-year-old woman, who had revolutionized infantry tactics through sheer audacity and psychological insight, who had killed 37 German soldiers in 42 hours, who had accomplished what battalions couldn't, who was already planning to do it again. Holloway didn't know whether to recommend her for the Medal of Honor or a psychiatric evaluation. Possibly both. Outside the hospital tent, December wind howled across the Hürtgen forest. Somewhere 800 meters to the north, German forces were regrouping, reinforcing, preparing new defensive positions. In 4 hours, Evelyn Hartwell would wake up and prepare to do the impossible one more time. The ghost was hunting again. December 21st, 0300 hours. Evelyn Claire Hartwell crawled into the darkness for the second time in 4 days. Her hands were still bandaged from frostbite. Her feet were numb in ways the medics said might be permanent. She had lost 11 pounds in 42 hours, and her core temperature had only returned to normal 6 hours ago. But she was crawling. The new position was different from the first. The terrain here was more challenging, a steep slope where erosion had carved a natural hollow into the hillside. German forces of the 89th Infantry Division held the ridge above. Better trained than the 275th, better equipped, more disciplined. They had also been warned about Die Geistfrau, which meant Evelyn needed to be more than invisible. She needed to be impossible enough that even warned soldiers wouldn't believe their eyes. The crawl took 2 hours to cover 300 meters. Every movement was agony. Her frostbitten hands screamed as she pulled herself forward. Her feet wrapped in extra layers of cloth dragged behind her like dead weight. But by 0500 hours, she was in position. This time, she didn't just camouflage herself. She buried herself. Used real snow, packed it around her body, over her legs, across her torso. Left only her face and rifle scope exposed. And even those were concealed beneath a thin layer that she could see through, but that would read as nothing more than disturbed snow. The position was more confining than the first. Once settled, she would have virtually no mobility. If discovered, she couldn't evade, couldn't fight, couldn't do anything except die. But the concealment was perfect. As dawn broke across the valley, her third December sunrise in this frozen hell, Evelyn began her final hunt. Through her scope, the German positions revealed themselves gradually. The 89th was professional. Their camouflage was excellent, their discipline tight. They moved in patterns that were irregular enough to avoid predictability but coordinated enough to maintain defensive integrity. Under normal circumstances, assaulting this ridge would cost American forces dozens of casualties. Maybe hundreds. But these weren't normal circumstances. Evelyn spent the entire morning observing. No shots, no movement, just pure intelligence gathering. She cataloged positions with the systematic precision that had made her valuable to the OSS. Machine gun emplacement at 270 degrees range, 290 meters. Mortar team at 315 degrees range, 310 meters. Command post identifiable by messenger traffic, 320 degrees range, 325 meters. 17 positions total. A sophisticated network of mutually supporting strongpoints designed to create overlapping fields of fire. Any American assault would advance directly into carefully prepared kill zones where multiple weapons could engage simultaneously. The German defensive plan was brilliant. It relied on concealment and coordination. If American forces attacked without identifying these positions, the slaughter would be catastrophic. By 1300 hours, Evelyn had the complete picture, had mapped the entire defensive network in her mind with the clarity of a cartographer. Knew exactly where each position was, what weapons they held, how they supported each other. Now came the destruction. The first target was a German lieutenant coordinating between positions. He exposed himself for only seconds at a time, moving quickly between cover points. But Evelyn had been watching him for 2 hours, knew his patterns, knew he favored the left side of his communication trench because a fallen log provided better overhead cover, knew that in 14 seconds he would cross a gap, 290 meters, moving target, crosswind from the east at 6 miles per hour. Evelyn led him, squeezed. The lieutenant fell mid-stride, his body crumpling into the snow. The German reaction was instant and overwhelming. Machine guns opened fire across the entire sector. Artillery shells began falling on suspected American positions. The volume of fire was impressive, professional. Exactly what well-trained soldiers should do. But none of it came near Evelyn's actual position. She waited 30 minutes. Let the Germans exhaust their initial response. Let them settle back into watchfulness. Then she continued. A machine gun team leader partially concealed behind reinforced logs. He had made the mistake of exposing his head and shoulders while directing fire. 300 meters. Difficult shot with the partial concealment. Evelyn took it anyway. Hit. The team leader fell back into his position. The machine gun fire from that emplacement ceased immediately, the crew disrupted by the loss of their leader. A mortar observer calling in fire coordinates. 295 meters. The observer thought he was safe behind his protective berm. He wasn't. Evelyn's round found him. The mortar team fired 2 more rounds, then went silent as they realized they had no one to provide targeting information. A communications specialist attempting to restore radio contact between positions. 305 meters. The specialist was using his radio equipment as cover, thinking the metal housing would protect him. It didn't. Evelyn's round punched through the radio and into his chest. 2 casualties from one shot, the specialist and the radio network. A German sergeant attempting to restore order among soldiers who were refusing to leave cover. 270 meters. The sergeant was standing in the open, gesturing, shouting. Making himself an example of courage. Evelyn made him an example of mortality. By 1500 hours, she had fired 14 rounds, 14 hits. The German 89th Infantry Division, one of the most professional units on the Western Front, was disintegrating, but not quietly. Through her scope, Evelyn saw something that made her pause. A German officer had gathered his remaining men, was addressing them, pointing at the valley, gesturing toward where the shots were coming from. They were going to search. Evelyn watched as a squad of German soldiers assembled, watched them prepare for a patrol into the valley. If they came down here, if they searched systematically, they would find her. Her position was concealed, but it wouldn't withstand a deliberate search at close range. She had two choices: withdraw now, abandon the mission but survive, or eliminate the search party. Evelyn chose elimination. The German squad leader was organizing his men, giving final instructions. 280 meters, stationary target. She fired. The squad leader fell. The remaining soldiers looked at each other, looked at the valley, looked at their fallen leader. Then as one they refused to advance, refused to die searching for a ghost they couldn't find. The German officer screamed orders. The soldiers ignored him. Finally, one of them raised his rifle and fired not at the Americans, not at Evelyn, but into the air. A single shot of defiance. Then they withdrew, abandoned their positions, walked away from the defensive line they had been ordered to hold. Evelyn had just witnessed something rare in warfare: a mutiny. Soldiers refusing orders not from cowardice but from simple mathematics. The equation was clear: searching the valley meant death, and death accomplished nothing. The psychological warfare had worked beyond her calculations. She hadn't just degraded German combat capability, she had broken their will. By 1800 hours, as darkness fell on her third day in the field, Evelyn had fired 28 rounds. Her most active day. Each shot had been calculated for maximum psychological impact. Each shot another nail in the coffin of German morale. Now came the final phase. Evelyn pulled a flashlight from her gear, modified with a red filter to minimize visible signature, aimed it at the American ridge and began transmitting in Morse code. ... Position reports. All 17 German strongpoints, complete intelligence on fields of fire, dead spaces, optimal approach routes for assault. The transmission took 12 minutes. 12 minutes of exposure, of risk, of hope that German observers weren't watching the valley with night vision equipment. When she finished, a single flash came back from the American lines. Message received. Captain Holloway had what he needed. Now Evelyn just had to survive long enough to see the results. The withdrawal was agony. 3 hours of crawling through darkness, through snow, through pain that made her previous suffering seem mild by comparison. Her frostbite had worsened. Her dehydration was critical. She had lost an additional 4 pounds, bringing her total weight loss to 15 pounds in 72 hours. When she finally reached American lines at 2300 hours, she couldn't stand, couldn't speak, could only lie there as medics swarmed her position, as Captain Holloway knelt beside her with an expression that mixed admiration and horror. "You did it," he said quietly. "Intelligence says your information is perfect. Complete picture of their defenses. We assaulted 0500. Evelyn tried to respond, managed only a nod. "You're being evacuated immediately. Field hospital first, then rear area facility. The doctors say." Evelyn grabbed his arm with her bandaged hand. The grip was weak, but the intent was clear. "Results," she whispered. "Tell me results." "I will," Holloway promised. "I will." They carried her to the hospital tent as artillery fire began falling on German positions. Preparation for the dawn assault. The last thing Evelyn heard before the morphine claimed her was the sound of American guns. The sound of victory. December 22nd, 0500 hours. Company F advanced under cover of darkness using the routes Evelyn had identified. They bypassed the strongest German positions. Concentrated force at weak points only she had recognized. Achieved complete tactical surprise. By 0800 hours, the objective was secured. American forces occupied positions that should have cost them days of fighting and dozens of casualties. Actual cost: 4 wounded, none killed. German casualties 68 over 3 days. Evelyn's personal count: 20 kills on day 1, 20 more on day 2, 28 on day 3, 68 confirmed kills, most of them leaders, specialists, the kind of soldiers who couldn't be quickly replaced. The kind of losses that destroyed unit cohesion and combat effectiveness. 17 prisoners captured. All of them shell-shocked, terrified, talking about Die Geistfrau who could see everything and kill anyone. The intelligence officer who debriefed them filed a report that would eventually reach OSS headquarters in Washington. The report noted that the German prisoners showed symptoms consistent with extreme psychological trauma. Several refused to believe the sniper had been a single person. One insisted it had been a supernatural entity, a forest spirit punishing them for invading its territory. The intelligence officer noted this was likely combat fatigue and recommended psychiatric evaluation. He had no idea how close to the truth the German soldier had been. Not supernatural, but certainly beyond normal human capability. 3 days later, in a field hospital 30 kilometers behind the front lines, Evelyn received visitors. Captain Holloway arrived first, carrying a wooden box and an official-looking document. "The Silver Star," he said, opening the box to reveal the medal, "for gallantry in action against an enemy of the United States. The citation is classified. OSS operations don't get public recognition, but the medal is real. 68 confirmed casualties. Intelligence provided enabled successful advance across a critical sector. You accomplished what 3 weeks of conventional operations couldn't." Evelyn looked at it without touching. Her hands were still too damaged for fine motor control. "Division Command wants to know if you can do it again," Holloway continued. "If the technique is replicable." "It's replicable," Evelyn said, her voice still rough from dehydration damage. "The psychology is sound. The tactics work. But it requires the right person. Someone who understands cognitive biases. Someone who can endure extreme physical hardship. Someone willing to become invisible by becoming impossible. Someone like you. Someone trained by me. The OSS should develop this into doctrine. Psychological warfare combined with extreme fieldcraft. It's more effective than anything we've tried." Holloway nodded slowly. "They're already talking about it, about creating specialized training programs, about incorporating your methods into sniper schools and reconnaissance doctrine. You've started something, Evelyn, something that will outlast this war." "Good." Evelyn closed her eyes. "That makes it worth it." "Does it?" Holloway asked quietly. 68 men dead. Your hands may never fully recover. You have nightmares. The medics hear you screaming. Was it worth that price?" Evelyn opened her eyes, met his gaze. "Those 68 would have killed how many Americans? How many of our soldiers came home because I stopped them? That's the equation, Captain. That's always the equation in war. You sound like you've made peace with it. I sound like someone who doesn't have a choice. The kills are mine. The responsibility is mine. All I can do is make sure they meant something." Holloway was quiet for a moment. Then, "There's something else you should know. We captured a German Oberleutnant, senior NCO counter-sniper specialist, Klaus Weber. He asked to speak with whoever killed his spotter. Said he had information to share." "What did you tell him?" "That we'd consider it. Do you want to meet him?" Evelyn thought about it, about the man who had hunted her, who had been smart enough to find her but not quite able to believe what his eyes told him. "No," she said finally. "Let him wonder. Let him spend the rest of his life asking if it was real. That's a better ending than any conversation we could have." Holloway smiled slightly. "You're a cruel woman, Evelyn Hartwell. I'm a practical one. Mystery is more powerful than revelation." 40 years later, May 1984. Professor Evelyn Hartwell sat in her office at Wesleyan University, grading papers on cognitive psychology and visual perception. At 62, she was one of the university's most respected faculty members. Her research on selective attention and cognitive bias had influenced everything from advertising to military training to eyewitness testimony protocols. Students knew her as demanding but fair. Colleagues knew her as brilliant and occasionally difficult. None of them knew what she had done in the winter of 1944. The Silver Star was in a box in her closet. She never displayed it, never talked about it. The war had been classified when it happened and remained classified in her mind. Until the letter arrived. It was postmarked from Munich, Germany. The handwriting was shaky but precise. The envelope was addressed to Professor E.C. Hartwell, Department of Psychology, Wesleyan University. Inside was a single sheet of paper written in careful English. Dear Professor Hartwell, my name is Klaus Weber. I am 74 years old, retired, living in Munich. For 40 years I have carried a secret. A question that has haunted me since December 1944 in the Hürtgen forest. I was the Oberleutnant who hunted you, who calculated the angles and concluded the impossible, who looked through my field glasses on December 19th at 1500 hours and saw you lying among the dead at 278 meters. I saw you. I know I saw you. But I reported you as a decoy, told my commander it was an American mannequin designed to draw fire, because what I saw was impossible. No human being could lie in -12-degree temperatures for days. No one could endure what you endured. I was wrong. You were real. You killed my spotter Gefreiter Hans Müller. He was 19 years old, a good boy from Bavaria. You killed him because he was my eyes, and without him I was blind. It was brilliant tactics, I respect that. War is chess played with lives. But I must tell you something I have never told anyone. After you shot Müller, I continued searching, continued studying the valley, and at 1600 hours I found you again, focused my field glasses on the exact depression where you lay. Saw the outline of a human form. Saw the subtle rise and fall of respiration. I had you. Perfect shot. 300 meters, I could have ended it. But I did not fire, not because I didn't believe you were there. By then I knew with certainty that the American Die Geistfrau was real, was in my sights, was vulnerable. I didn't fire because I could not make myself kill someone doing something so impossible, so audacious, so utterly beyond normal human capacity. You were not a soldier to me in that moment. You were a force of nature, a demonstration that human beings could transcend every limitation if they had sufficient will. Killing you would have been like killing a miracle, so I lowered my rifle, told no one. Let you continue your work, and when we withdrew, when we abandoned positions we had held for months, I knew it was because of you, because one person had accomplished what battalions could not. I have lived 40 years knowing I let you live, knowing that decision might have cost German lives. Knowing I chose honor over duty, I do not regret it. You taught me something, Professor Hartwell. You taught me that the greatest weapons are not technological, they are psychological. The ability to make the enemy doubt reality itself, to make them see you and not believe what they see. Your brilliance was not the marksmanship, it was making us doubt our own eyes. I am dying now. Cancer. The doctors give me perhaps 6 months. Before I go, I needed you to know the truth, that I found you, that I let you live, that you changed how I understood warfare and human capability. I hope this letter finds you well. I hope you have had a good life. I hope the nightmares have faded. With respect and something that transcends enmity. Klaus Weber, Oberleutnant, retired Wehrmacht, 275th Infantry Division. Evelyn read the letter 3 times. Then she sat back in her chair and stared out her office window at the Connecticut campus. At students walking between classes, laughing, living lives that would never know what she had done, what she had endured, what she had become. Weber had found her, had her in his sights, and chose not to fire because she was impossible. The impossibility that had protected her hadn't been camouflage or stealth or luck. It had been something deeper, something that spoke to human psychology at its most fundamental level. She had made herself so unlikely, so beyond reasonable belief that, even when discovered, even when vulnerable, the enemy couldn't bring themselves to act. Evelyn pulled out a sheet of her university letterhead and began to write. Dear Herr Weber, thank you for your truth. It is a gift I did not expect and do not deserve. You were right to doubt your eyes. What I did was impossible. Should have been impossible. I survived through cognitive science, through understanding how the human brain categorizes reality and filters information. I made you doubt reality, and in that doubt I found my shield. You say you let me live because I represented something beyond normal warfare. I appreciate that. But I think there is another truth. You let me live because you understood that killing me would prove nothing. The technique would survive. The knowledge would spread. Killing the practitioner would not stop the practice. You were right. The methods I developed in those 3 days have influenced military doctrine for 40 years. Special forces train in cognitive camouflage. Sniper schools teach psychological warfare. SEER training incorporates the principles I discovered by necessity in the Hurtgen forest. You could have killed me, but you couldn't kill the idea. I hope your final months are peaceful. I hope you have made your own peace with the war and its necessities. We were enemies once. Time has made us something else. Not friends, perhaps, but fellow survivors who understand things others cannot. The nightmares have not faded. They never will. 68 lives taken. 68 families receiving telegrams. That weight does not diminish with time, but neither does the knowledge that those 68 would have killed others. That the equation, terrible as it is, still balances toward necessity. We did what war required of us, and we survived to question it. That is its own form of victory. With respect and understanding, Evelyn Claire Hartwell, Professor of Psychology, Wesleyan University. She mailed the letter that afternoon. Weber would be dead before he could reply. The 6-month prognosis was optimistic for terminal cancer. But he would know that she understood, that the impossible had recognized the impossible. That evening, Evelyn taught her final class of the semester. Advanced Cognitive Psychology, 40 students, most of them seniors preparing for graduate work. The topic was selective attention and cognitive filtering. She wrote on the board the invisible gorilla experiment. When focused on one task, the human brain filters out unexpected stimuli, even obvious ones, even ones that should be impossible to miss. A student raised her hand. But Professor Hartwell, doesn't that mean our perception of reality is fundamentally flawed, that we can't trust what we see? It means, Evelyn said carefully, that we see what we expect to see. The brain is efficient. It categorizes constantly. Threat, non-threat, relevant, irrelevant. And once something is categorized as irrelevant, it becomes functionally invisible. So we're blind to the unexpected. We're blind to the impossible. The brain filters out information that doesn't fit its model of reality, which means the best camouflage isn't hiding. It's making yourself impossible to believe. She looked at her students, at their young faces, their earnest questions, their certainty that the world made sense and could be understood. The invisible have the greatest power, Evelyn said quietly. Not because they cannot be seen, but because they cannot be believed. After class, she walked across the empty campus. December evening cold, but nowhere near -12 Celsius. Snow falling gently beautiful instead of deadly. 40 years ago, she had lain among corpses in a frozen valley and killed 68 men in 72 hours, had revolutionized psychological warfare, had survived the impossible and changed military doctrine forever. Now she taught cognitive psychology to students who would never know. The war had made her invisible in ways that transcended camouflage. The classification that protected OSS operations had erased her from history. The Silver Star citation remained secret. The techniques she had pioneered were taught without attribution. She had become what she had pretended to be in that valley. A ghost, present but unseen, real but unbelieved. Evelyn stopped at the campus memorial to World War II veterans, looked at the names carved in stone. Good men who had died in conventional ways through conventional warfare, remembered conventionally. Her name wasn't there, would never be there. She had survived, and survival meant silence. But in sniper schools at Fort Benning, instructors taught about cognitive camouflage. In SERE training at Fairchild Air Force Base, soldiers learned about psychological endurance. In Special Operations Command Centers, planners incorporated her methods into doctrine. The ghost lived on, not in monuments or medals or official recognition, but in the minds of soldiers who understood that the greatest weapon was the mind itself, and that was enough. Evelyn walked home through the falling snow, carrying secrets no one would ever know, bearing weights no one could understand. Living a quiet life that contradicted everything she had once been. The impossible had saved her life 40 years ago. Now it protected her peace. In the distance, church bells rang. Evening service, the sound carried across the campus, across the town. Across the decades that separated the woman walking home from the soldier who had lain among the dead. Same person, different impossibility. The mind Evelyn had learned was the ultimate weapon, not because it could kill, but because it could make killing unnecessary. Could make the enemy defeat themselves through fear, through doubt, through the inability to believe what their own eyes showed them. She had proven that in December 1944. She proved it every day by living a normal life while carrying extraordinary knowledge. The invisible remained invisible. The impossible remained impossible. And the ghost of Hurtgen walked freely through a world that would never know her name. Somewhere in Munich, Klaus Weber received a letter. Read it once, smiled slightly, then closed his eyes for the final time, knowing that the impossible had acknowledged the impossible. Two soldiers who had transcended war had found peace in mutual understanding. The duel, 40 years delayed, had ended in a draw. Both had won by refusing to let victory require death. Both had lost by knowing things that could never be shared. The equation balanced. The ghosts rested. And in the frozen forests of Hurtgen, where snow still fell each December, the dead kept their secrets while the living forgot. All except two. One soldier who had made herself impossible. One soldier who had chosen not to believe. Both were right. Both were free. The war was over. The victory was silence. And the greatest weapon the human mind, understanding itself, endured beyond memory, beyond recognition, beyond everything except its own terrible, beautiful truth.